Welcome to the Church of Jesus Christ. And I pray that the Lord blesses you this morning with His word. And my prayer, personal prayer, is that I not get in the way of that. As I prep for services, I always ask the Lord to take over my thoughts. And I understand this. He speaks in the language that I speak. And so there's probably a flavor to the messages that is a little bit of me, but I hope it's never me, and it's instead just my personality. So having said that, let's get started. You may want to grab a notepad, a piece of paper. I'm going to ask you a couple questions, and you may want to do those later, if not immediately. But even if you have electronic devices, maybe you'll type on those. I'm ancient of years, and so my go-to is not an electronic device, but I have learned to take notes on my phone and on my iPads, and so it does work. It's just when you're in your 60s, that's not the norm. I like the feel of paper. So I'm going to ask you a couple questions. You can answer them as we go on your paper. You can write the questions down if you want to, or you can just sit and stay in touch with the service. So we're going to start with a question or two that I hope resonates with you. Starting with an easy one, I think. Do you have any favorite outfits? And for me, I separate those from casual versus dress. What it means is I have some favorite ties. I have a couple ties that I really like. The kids have given me some ties. So those probably show up in church services more than the others because they're my favorites. I have a couple pair of favorite articles of clothing, like jeans. I wear blue jeans just jeans almost every day, and I have some favorites. I'm a child of the 60s, and so I've even sewn patches on my jeans like we used to do in the 60s and 70s. And so those jeans with the favorite patches are my favorite jeans. Yesterday, we saw a couple who were visiting with us, Charity and Shalom. We went and had coffee with Aubrey and Kylie and their families, and Charity and Shalom were with them. And she made a comment, "Hey, I love your Route 66 patch on your jeans. Did that come with the jeans?" And there was an insult involved. She was questioning, I'm sure, my skills to sew, and she wasn't aware she was in front of a seamstress. And I told her, no, I put my own patches on my jeans. And so that pair of jeans is one of my favorites. So you understand. I'm going on and on so that you can kind of connect with my questions and understand what I mean by that. Do you have favorite foods? Because a lot of you, your last names end with vowels, I'm going to assume you have favorite foods. And so that comes almost naturally for some of us who are raised in homes where, for me, it was a mom. For others, it was dad's. But where my mom cooked, and we knew every Sunday, we knew every Wednesday night, we were at least those 2 days getting some form of pasta. So I grew up with that in mind, and I have favorites. So for a long time, when Candace and I would go to any Italian restaurant, I would always get chicken marsala. And I would get that so I could compare one restaurant to the other. If you get this is just my theory. If you get different dishes, you can't really do a fair comparison. And so I would use chicken marsala to do my test on how well I enjoyed that restaurant. So do you have favorite foods? Candace and I dated. I don't know if this is because I was poor or because I just enjoy them, but I always ordered hamburgers when we went out. One type of hamburger, another cheeseburger, maybe a mushroom burger, but always hamburgers. Favorite foods. I'm going on and on so that I can kickstart your brains and maybe you can think about that. Do you have a favorite spot to eat? Maybe locally or maybe even far away. My dad, this is an extraordinary story. My dad used to pile us in a car and take us up to DeLand, Florida, literally 3 hours away. A lot of Sundays after church, my dad was not a church guy. So Sundays after church, he would pile us in. That was his only day he did not work normally. So he'd pile us in the car and we would drive up to DeLand, Florida, 3 hours north, to go to a restaurant, a buffet restaurant, and we would eat there. So your favorite spot might be further away than just in town. So I give you that story just to keep it in mind. When we would travel, come to conference or go on trips, wherever it was, but normally to conferences and campouts, I would run on fumes if I had to make sure I could get to a Sheetz gas station. Sheetz was the family favorite, and we would stop at Sheetz, and there was no way we were coming out of that Sheetz without a half hour spent shopping, getting something to eat, looking for things. We just, our family loves Sheetz. Now, Aubrey called me or texted me one day from Bowling Green, Kentucky. She said, Dad, you've got to go to Buc-ee's. I've not been to a Buc-ee's, but she said, well, you cannot leave this gas station without spending at least an hour or more in their store. She said it's like a huge department store. So I've not been there yet, but I guarantee you I will waste life when we stop in Buc-ee's just shopping around and looking around. Favorite spots to eat. I told the folks on Tuesday night, the Tuesday nighters, that I'm in my glory. We opened for the first time ever in Louisville, Kentucky, a Publix grocery store. Some of you don't know what a Publix is, but it's a South Florida. It's actually Atlanta, Georgia, but a South Florida grocery store that I just absolutely loved. Candace and I went by it yesterday. We were going to go in, packed. So we're gonna have to wait a month or two before the excitement is gone. Favorite spots, favorite eating spots, if you will. Favorite friends. When I say favorites, do you think, and I say favorite friends, do people's names come to mind? And some of us had childhood friends, teenage friends, high school friends, maybe college friends if you went to college, friends at jobs that don't translate into other places. They're just your friends at a job site, and you probably never go further than that. So anyway, do you have favorite friends? Even now, do you have favorite friends? Friends at church? Friends at community functions, wherever it might be. Neighborhood friends. Candace and I have a favorite couple in our neighborhood. We never see them anywhere but on the street when they walk or we walk. So we sub kind of categorize things as favorites. Most of us have this, whether we write these down or not. We have these favorites. I wonder if you have a favorite vacation spot or even a wish list favorite vacation spot. We saw a couple was climbing into an airplane. They take pictures and they post them on Facebook. And then they arrived and they post pictures on Facebook. And then they go to restaurants and they post pictures on Facebook. And I'm just filled with envy. I would love to tell you I'm celebrating the joy that they're having at their vacation, but I'm looking thinking, oh, what a great spot to be at. So having said that, do you have a favorite vacation spot that you've been to or that you want to go to? Favorites. I think this question comes in all kinds of forms. I'm not gonna exhaust it any further, and I have exhausted it this morning. But you understand what I mean when I speak to you about favorites. Growing up in the Church of Jesus Christ as a young person, like you, maybe I had favorite hymns. I'll confess to you, and since we're only 20 or so, as long as you don't tell anyone this, I had favorite ministers who I would love to listen to, yeah, I'll leave it there. I was gonna say, and no, I'll just leave it there. I had favorites that I loved to hear when they would get up and speak. So we all have favorites. I still carry around a list of favorite scriptures. I think I now have accumulated 8 of my favorite scriptures. I call them life verses. Those are verses that have affected me at some point or continue to affect me. And they are things that probably shape my spiritual life and my natural life. So I find them important. So I list them. I have them typed out and I save that list and I add to it if I ever add a 9th. Right now it's 8 and we're on a kind of a hold pattern with these 8. But that 8th came probably about 3 years ago, 4 years ago. So it is a dynamic list. It's just not every day adjusted and amended. Do you have favorite scripture verses? All of this to get our minds thinking favorites. Now, my question to you is, does God have favorites? Our theme today is God's favorites. And as I ask that, I want you to think that through in your mind. As I was praying and contemplating in this theme came to me about God's favorites. And where I wandered mentally was, does God have favorite places on this earth? Does he sit back and say, man, that Grand Canyon, I really did something spectacular there. Does he look at maybe mountaintops? Does he look at areas maybe where he knows uh, something spectacular happened? Does he still look down where the manger was, if it isn't anymore, and say, "Oh, that spot"? Does he have favorites? Does he have favorite moments in the history of mankind? Now, and this is where Candace says, "Okay, stop talking." But I wonder, does he have favorites outside of this particular um, planet? Does he have other places that are his favorites? Our God is God over everything. I don't know how you define everything. I'm not going to take a left turn and start talking about how I see God and the greatness of God and what he's created. But does he have favorites in every sense of the word? Now, to bring it even more personal and certainly bring it to our theme today, does God have favorites defined by people? Both peoples, a group of, and individuals. We know this, that he does. The word confirms it. The word confirms that there are some who have made it to that list, whatever that list of favorites is. When Mary was first approached, the mother of Jesus Christ, when Mary was first approached, the verse in Luke 1:28 says, "And the angel came in unto her and said, Hail, thou that art highly favored, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women." God's favorites. So individually, this can happen, where he looks down and sees the purity of someone or some people maybe, and they make it to this list, whatever this list means. I don't even know if I understand God's concept and definition of favorites. I know mine is limited. Mine is earthly in mindset. I told you I like jeans that have Route 66 patch on them. So I'm a simpleton, especially in comparison. So I don't know what favoritism or favorites looks like with God. I don't certainly think he's as small-minded as I am. And what I mean by that is when I have favorites, it's challenging to me because like I told you earlier, when I was a young person, I had favorite speakers. Does that mean that I closed my mind to other brothers who would get up and speak and say, "Oh, I've heard him before," and it wasn't, my excitement wasn't there? I don't know. I don't remember what an 18-year-old Doug looked and thought like, so I don't remember that. But I do remember that there were those who excited me when I knew they were going to get up and speak. But again, I don't see God in the same vein or the same way I see myself. So I want to be clear on that. So we know that there are those who have made it to that list. In John, the first chapter, it says this, "But as many as received him," Jesus Christ, and certainly God, "but as many as received him, to them gave he power to become the sons of God, even to them that believe on his name." God's favorites. Mary chosen by the walk she took. Others grafted in or adopted in, if you will, by the decisions made. Genesis speaks of the beginning. When I said to you, or excuse me, when I asked you, does God have favorites, especially as a people, maybe all of you, some of you, most of you, I don't know the numbers, went immediately to Israel. Thought, oh, his favorite people. How did that begin? Were they born into this, or was there an event? Did it happen upon a people because of an event? I don't know, but I can get you closer. I'm going to go to Genesis 22. A couple verses in the teens, probably 16, maybe 17, possibly 18. I didn't write down, but it's Genesis 22. It says this, "By myself have I sworn, saith the Lord, for because thou hast done this thing," and I'll explain what this thing is, "and hast not withheld thy son, thine only son, that in blessing I will bless thee. And in multiplying, I will multiply thy seed as the stars of the heaven and as the sand which is upon the seashore. We've heard this blessing continued over and over, generation to generation, by the way, with this people. And thy seed shall possess the gate of his enemies. And in thy seed shall all nations of the earth be blessed, because thou hast obeyed my voice, said God to Abraham. Abraham willingly was ready to slay his son to express his love to the Lord. That he was willing to give his only son, his miracle son. Remember the story. This was not just a son, this was his miracle son given to him later in life. And he was willing to sacrifice him. Because of that, his people are blessed. We read words like predestinate and we dissect them and we get into conversations. But I would just suggest to you, those born into that bloodline, would we not think of them as predestined to be part of the favored people? So let's not choke on little words or phrases and think, how could that happen? Those born in to the tribe of Joseph, whether that be in Jerusalem, those remaining from the Josephites in Jerusalem, or those that we've identified here in the Americas, whether that be the tribe of Dan, wherever that is, whether that be the tribe of Reuben, wherever that is, the tribe of Naphtali, wherever that is, we don't know. But wouldn't those offsprings be born into favoritism? Because we know God loves Israel. We read this blessing. My smallness, to be certain, my smallness might define who my favorites are, if you will. And what I mean by that is maybe I just don't have the capacity to expand from 4 favorites to 5 favorites. I can't handle the responsibility. But I want to tell you, as John writes, God is love. God has a capacity to expand his list of favorites. Yes, there are some who are born in. There are others of us who are grafted in because of his choosing us and us feeling we're choosing him. But favorites nonetheless. I want to empower you with that. And I want to empower you with that responsibility. Mrs. Smith in first grade was my first exposure to a school teacher, was my first exposure to teachers' pets. And if no one will tell Mrs. Smith, who's probably, if she's still around, probably 90 years old, if no one will tell her I told you, I found that I was one of her teacher's pets. I moved away from Pompano Beach, her class, and we moved to West Palm Beach. My parents did. And she and her husband visited us in West Palm and had a wonderful talk with my parents, who my dad would never tell me things that she said about me, but my mom later did. Bragging, probably. But what I learned was I was one of her favorites. I can't tell you the empowerment of that. If I met Mrs. Smith today, I would do all that I could to maintain my status as a favorite. Understand something, that's 60 years ago. And I'm still carrying the burden of making certain I never compromise my status as a favorite. Why do I tell you that silly story about a 6-year-old kid? Because if we are they who are deemed adopted in as his favorites, we must never jeopardize, compromise, that our status would be questioned. Not just by people, but certainly by people, but by God himself. I've told you before, my understanding of the love of God came from the relationship I had with my parents. I've told you that my understanding of what the fear of God is came by way of that same relationship. When I was making poor decisions in my life, one particular night, I was given an opportunity to make another poor decision. I was with friends at a party and I was given that opportunity. And my first thought was, if my dad finds out, am I willing to accept the problems and trouble and punishment that would come with this decision? And it was yes, without question. I would make another bad decision. And immediately, I remember it so well. Immediately, I thought, if this would jeopardize my standing with my mom, and I would see disappointment in her eyes because of another bad decision, would I be willing to trade this decision, this silly, frivolous decision, for her seeing disappointment in her eyes? And I never made that bad decision again in my life. That moment, I stopped. And I understood what the fear of God and the love of God was in that moment. It's greater than a fear of retribution. It was a fear of disappointment. It was a fear of losing my status as a favorite. Theme today is God's favorites. Jesus Christ spoke to his own and he said, "You are my friends." This is John 15, by the way. "You are my friends if you do whatever I command you." Take no chances with losing your status as his friend, as his favorite. "You are my friends if you do whatsoever I command you. Henceforth, I call you not servants, for the servant knoweth not what the Lord does. But I have called you friends, for all things that I have heard of my Father I have made known to you." Now we're going to get to our chapter study today. It's Romans, the 8th chapter. I hope I've built an introduction. I hope I've made a case. I hope I've made a case for you. I hope I've taken away maybe questions of where do I fit in this? My bloodline isn't to Israel. I am but a man. I am but a woman. And then fill in your blank. In this little hometown of mine. I see Sister Marianne, and anytime I see Jen, or I see Sister Marianne, or I see Brother Ed, I am taken back to my roots. My mom, born and raised in Glassport, Pennsylvania. I'm picturing the church building and the little house to the right of the church building. That's where my mom grew up. So when I see them, I'm back in that spot. So we are they who dwell in these little towns. I mean, I live in a little dot in Kentucky called LaGrange, Kentucky. You won't find it on a map unless you blow your map up. It's a little town. That's who we are. How could we be so bold, even sounding so arrogant as to call ourselves favorites? Well, it's not about us. It's about the verses I've read to you. It's not about a young man or a young woman being born into a family, into a bloodline, and instantly, immediately being favored of God because of who they are by way of their birth. We have that same tie by way of the birth of Jesus Christ and our acceptance of that, but favorites nonetheless. Romans 8, the 24th verse, and we're gonna head for 8:28, which everyone knows, and I'll identify it when I get there. And you'll say, "Oh yeah, I know that verse." But there are verses before and verses after that give us a more complete story than just knowing that all things work together for good. So there are buffers before, introductions before, and explanations after. In 24, it starts this way: "For we are saved by hope." And I would say this to you: ye who are his favorites. Remember, our theme today is God's favorites. And my warning is never compromise. Never take any chances to lose that glorious status. And here's the backfill to what that means. For we are saved by hope, but hope that is seen is not hope. We talked about this Tuesday night. We'll never see God while we live on this earth. We'll never see some of the things we believe in because he wants to continually test your faith and your commitment and your dedication. But faith that is seen is not hope. For what a man seeth, why doth he yet hope for? I hope someday I'll get this car, and then I get that car. I don't have to hope for that car anymore. I have to just start that car up and drive around town. So we wouldn't continue to hope if we would see the things that are coming or that are given to us. So we hope. But if we hope for that we see not, then do we with patience wait for it. We hope to see that day that we enter in to paradise. And we wait patiently for it. For that particular hope, I'm willing to wait even more than he might be willing to give me. I want to spend time with my family as long as I can, because once that hope is fulfilled, there's no coming back. And I'm enjoying my family. I'm enjoying each of you. I'm enjoying this life. But we wait patiently for it, says the word. Likewise, the Spirit also helps our infirmities, our weaknesses, our frailties. For we know not what we should pray for as we ought, but the Spirit makes intercession for us with groanings which cannot be uttered. What that means is we can't even pray without God's Spirit guiding us. I find that verse extraordinary in an extraordinary way to show us how infirm we are, how frail we are, how human we are. But we can't even pray properly without His Spirit making intercession. Oh, I always remember what my mom's question. Isn't it great to be dependent? And I didn't understand that, and now I understand it fully. As physically I become more frail, as mentally maybe I become a little more infirm, as I age and I all my weaknesses are fully exposed, I understand that dependence. I depend on God so much more today than I ever have before. And he that searches the hearts knoweth what is the mind of the Spirit, because he makes intercession for the saints according to the will of God. Our Savior is there to intercede, making certain we remain favorites, not for anything we've done, not for anything we deserve, but favorites nonetheless. And then the verse that we all love is introduced. And we know, we have an understanding. We know that all things work together for good to them that love God. And here is the power part of this verse for today. To them who are the called according to his purpose. No more questioning. No more saying I'm undeserved. You are undeserved. I'll be your attorney. I will make your case for your undeservedness. So that's not in dispute. All of us undeserved, but all of us the called according to God's purpose. So don't question why. That answer won't come. Just know that he chose you for his purpose. You are the called according to his purpose. For whom he did foreknow, he also did predestinate to be conformed to the image of his Son. We are called to be those in the absence of a physical Savior, to be those who will draw others to his purpose, to his cause, to his salvation. We are those who fall under the statement, all things work together for good. You are one of those things that works together for good. Your purpose is greater than you may understand. You are among God's favorites. Yes, I'm with you. I'm with you among the worst. Paul says, I am the worst of the sinners, the greatest of the sinners. Paul utters the same thing that we see Nephi utter. Oh, wretched man that I am. I relate. I get that. You get that. But that's not where we dwell. Nephi recovers himself. We know this. He recovers himself and says, I'm not going to droop in sin anymore. I'm not going to go down to that level, finding all my faults and making myself useless to God. So I accept God's calling, says Nephi, says Paul, says Michael Bufa, says Doug Obradovich, says any one of us, all of us. We have to understand that this is greater than ourselves and we have a purpose. We are among those things that work together for good because there are others who love God and need him, and you may be the conduit between them and salvation. We are they who are to be conformed to his image. So when we understand that, we're ready to move on. And the fullness of that explanation goes more. Moreover, whom he did predestinate, them he also called. No discussion, no argument, no case to be made for you being the least. It's assumed. And whom he called, them he also justified. I will never earn my way to his glory. I am justified by the righteousness of Jesus Christ. You are justified by the righteousness of Jesus Christ. Whom he also called, and whom he called, them he also justified, and whom he justified, them he also glorified. I always think of the experiences of those who have gone before us and have come back in a dream or a vision and expressed to us all that they've seen in the glory of God as they have been glorified by God. Saying things like, even if I could, I wouldn't return. Unfathomable to me. I'd get one more chance to see my children, to be with my children, my grandchildren, Candace. I don't understand what it feels like, that the purity and fullness of that glorification, that I wouldn't even want to return. But I know it must be so because of the confirming experiences I've heard from multiple people. So I believe. He that spared not his only son, but delivered him up for all of us, how shall he not with him also freely give us all things? Why did he love Abraham so? Because Abraham, thousands of years before he himself did that, he was not willing to spare his own son. Our God was not willing to spare his own son so that he might save all of us. That God who loved us so much that he wouldn't spare his son will give you what you need. That's what this verse is saying to you. He's not willing to waste his message, his calling, his plan of redemption, his plan of salvation by frustrating anything. You who are the called according to his purpose. Who shall lay anything to the charge of God's elect, God's favorites? It is God that justifies. Who is he then to condemn? It is Christ that died, yea, rather, that is risen again. Paul starts by saying Christ who died, and he says, no, that wasn't his full purpose. That was just a process to get to the greater event. So I'm going to read that again so you understand. It is Christ that died, yea, rather, that is risen again, who is even at the right hand of God, who also makes intercession for us. Who, and then again, the next power verse that you love, who shall separate us from the love of Christ? When you hear these verses flow together, they culminate in this question. Who then, after God has made this plan, God has chosen you, God has called you the called according to his purpose, He has called you the very elect. And then he says, so given all of that I've done for you, who shall separate us from the love of Christ? Shall tribulation, distress, persecution, famine, nakedness, peril, sword? As it is written, says Paul, for thy sake we are killed all the day long. We are accounted as sheep for the slaughter. We are willingly God's favorites, and all that comes with that moniker. Today, I reinforce and empower each one of you, not pridefully, but quite the opposite, humbly, that you accept this message of those who are God's favorites. Undeserved, amen. Willing, most definitely. In spite of our weaknesses, in spite of our infirmities, as Paul confesses, in spite of our frailties, in spite of our individual flaws, we must, for the sake of God and for the sake of others, accept this great calling. Because not only do those who are still waiting to meet Christ need this, even his favorites are dependent on you. And what I mean by that is, who will then take the message to Israel? Who will then help to culminate this beautiful story that began as an arm was coming down with a knife and was caught by the angel, a story that began probably even before that, but definitely confirmed in that moment. Who will help to take this story further in their time? As it's written by prophets of old and different individuals, who will cry to his own generation, is what it says. It's you. It's you. So today I thank God for each one of you. Today I thank God for what he has done to confirm you as his own. I thank God for what he has done to confirm you as his favorites. I wasn't willing to make one misstep that Mrs. Smith might take me off her list of favorites. She wouldn't know me and I wouldn't know her if I saw her today, if she's even alive today. But I walk with my eyes open just in case Mrs. Smith comes upon me. Just so I might hear her say, still Doug. What will you do to maintain your status, to make certain that you never jeopardize your status as God's favorites? And you are. May the Lord bless each one of you.